this. All right. Oh, nope. No, I don't see you for some reason. Oh, there you are. All right. All right, guys, let me know if this is working. My streaming ability is not nearly at the level of Todd, who we have here from Hexed Press, the streaming master.
I don't think you've watched many of my streams if I'm the streaming master. As many times as my stream conked out on me like it did just yesterday, where what's it called? Restreams interface decided to go white screen on me, and I had to just kind of hope and pray if I restarted Edge, it would come back. I am no streaming master. Do what I can, but happy to be here.
You've got the 10,000 hours in anyways, right? Because you got.
Well, yeah, that I've got though. How many of those are actually good hours is up for debate.
All right, that's so funny. Yeah, I every time I try to do this, I get a different problem. I was saying earlier before we went thing to Todd that I was like, I'm having some weird audio issue, and it turned out there was just a fan on, and I could hear it through my thing. I'm like, what?
So yeah, I'm right near a window, and actually the window's closed today because it's chilly in New York City. But it's one of those things that I will be hearing something outside, and to me it sounds super loud, and I'm like messing with it on the stream, and other people are like, yeah, I don't hear anything. I'm like, well, it's driving me crazy, the dump truck or whatever coming through. So I got to deal with it. New York City streaming. That's it.
Exactly right. So welcome everybody who's watching. We got a bunch of people here. It looks like we got Elf Bait, and my eyes are not good enough to read this from so far away. Fluffy, the Griffin, Steven, that's Eastseed. Wow, I gotta get bigger. I put the text thing on my 4K monitor where everything is half the size. So let me move that to my other monitor. There we go.
You got a 4K monitor, fancy.
Yeah, it seemed like a good idea until I realized that everything is tiny on it. So, all right, cool. Yeah, so we're gonna talk a little bit about telegraphing. I think we kind of were in the Audio Dungeon Discord and that came up.
Yeah.
I think it's something we both mention a bunch, so I thought we could just kind of lay it out there and see what people think and let us know what you guys think. So, of course, I don't have notes this time, even though I'm usually so well prepared. But my general thought was that the longer that you run games, or especially the more you get to know your group, the easier this becomes, right? To kind of let them know without telling them that, yeah, this is dangerous, right? Whether it be through smells or through some change in the atmosphere, or from see bones, whatever sounds, like these kind of things, right? Like these are all things that we can put out there to let people know that, hey, you know what? This is probably not a safe place, so go at your own risk.
Yeah, there's probably something to whether you're homebrewing also, because one of the issues that can come up with is if you're running a module and you're reading the flavor text, and then you roll a wandering encounter and it comes in, you can get caught up with just going in the encounter, but the flavor text might not match, your wandering monster check, right? So you come up with an ogre, but the flavor text in whatever area you're in doesn't really mention that kind of context. And you can get caught with like, well, I guess it's just there, whereas I think ideally what you want to do is when you're rolling that encounter check, and I know sometimes a good technique seems to be for people to roll them in advance so they kind of know what's coming, is to, one, figure out the specifics, right? So what is the monster? Where is it in relation to the party and what it's doing, right? And then feeding that back in. And obviously if it's a surprise situation, that becomes harder. But part of surprise is that the reason why the party's surprised is because there wasn't that flag to warn them that for whatever reason, right, either the ogre was they were coming from the east, the ogre was coming from the west, so ogre hadn't been through here yet, so there's no ogre traces, whatever that is. But barring that, is it just take that beat and say, okay, what is it, where is it, what is it doing, and then start to filter that back into the surroundings, which I think can also be tough because it's easy just to get, I think a lot of times it seems like GMs, particularly ones maybe with parties they're not super familiar with, maybe they're newer GMs, it's hard to stop.
Right.
It's hard to say, like, take a beat. Okay, like before I keep going with you guys moving down the hallway, like, hold on, let me figure that out. Like, I have no problem saying to my party, hey, I need a minute to sort out what I just rolled here. I need a minute to sort it out. So give me that minute. It can be hard to feel like you're stuck and you just kind of roll into it, in which case it just feels like there's no matching up, right? Whereas I think like step one is just take that moment to figure out what you need to telegraph. First of all, just give yourself that space to say, okay, guys, I need a minute break, or you're doing this, or just like give me that minute to think about it before I go on to the next thing. Because I think a lot of times you just get forced into kind of, or you feel like you're just forced to don't want to stop talking, just got to keep moving, and then it's easy to lose track of. So that would probably be like not necessarily a technique in and of itself, but hey, you got to give yourself the space to think about it, and then use whatever techniques we're going to talk about, whatever you used to follow. But first, you need that space. So give yourself the space. Number one.
Yeah, I think that's really important, right? And it's certainly, as you say, much easier to telegraph things that are already in the adventure. And maybe random monsters shouldn't be as telegraphed, depending on what they are, right? If you roll a dozen orcs coming down, a hallway, with their boots on and tramping down, you're going to hear some sounds, right? In theory, I guess if they surprise you on such. But like if so that could work for a random monster. But if for instance, there's a lair of a bear, right, or whatever, or let's say a witch, right, or something like that, you've got like all of a sudden it's quiet in the woods, or you see lots of mushrooms grow, whatever you want to have in your campaign that seems to lead towards that type of thing, and then you want to repeat it. I think that's one of the things where you got to be consistent. Like if you have mushrooms around every witch's house, that should be a witch thing, right? You want to make sure that people understand, oh, mushrooms could be witches, or I don't know why mushrooms and witches are going together, David. That is the thing I'm putting together. I think
drakes or some other kind of interest. You can come up kind of with your own little set of things. Yeah, I mean that's a really good point. Obviously, if you're homebrewing, you would hope with an official or published module that if you're going in the witch's neighborhood, they'll have that stuff kind of in there for you. But if you're homebrewing it, you definitely need to build in what is a witch's abode like? What are the woods like around it? And then feed and I think it's also good. I know sometimes everyone wants to be different. Lean into the tropes, right? Lean into the whole idea of the woods go silent. Okay, yeah, it happens all the time. Any kind of horror movie, anything, the woods are silent. But there's a reason why, and it's because it's that obvious key of something's wrong. And if you want to do something else, that's fine, but understand that your party may not get it. If you want to say, well, in the woods, when these birds get scared, they all get louder. Like the party's probably going to misinterpret what that means the first time. If you say, okay, the birds are chirping, now they're really chirping, they're going to think it's something, but they're probably not going to think it's what you think it is. Whereas if you, at least to start, go with the things that we often, especially in terms of OSR, we talk about how player knowledge and character knowledge are aligned, right? We like that idea that characters and players know about the same things. So we really are depending on not only the tropes for the characters, but what the players will know. And those things that you'll often see referenced in movies and other fiction are really great aids for that. But I think the other thing, coming up with like what is the flora and what is the fauna around there, right? What always grows around witches' huts for whatever reason, or what do goblins like to have, pigs or some other kind of animal. And so if you're in a spot and you suddenly see lots of like pig stuff, then maybe you might think either there's a whole bunch of pigs here or there are potentially goblins here, because that those pigs are associated with goblins. And you can really have a lot of fun with coming up with all kinds of interesting associations in your world.
Yeah, and I think so like rolling on that, so now just getting my mind going. So first of all, there needs to be a random table of ogre stuff, so we'll work on that. But and there's a couple things, but I think what would be interesting would be, okay, so let's say we're going to do the goblins with the pigs, right? Like, how do the players know that? Like I mentioned, maybe mushrooms are around the witches, but how do we know that, right? We want to let them know earlier in the campaign that the goblins have this pig connection. Either maybe the farmers are complaining that the goblins are stealing their pigs, right? Or they see goblins herding pigs in a more or less safe situation where they wouldn't necessarily interact with the goblins in a combat, or something. Or they tear up. You want rumors, right? You want people to talk about things, put it in the lore of your world, and then it's great when you do that, and then a player remembers it. They don't always remember it, but when they do remember, I think it's really just a great feeling.
Yeah, and it's also a way if you want to reward different backstories. I mean, I'm not a huge backstory person. I know OSR a lot of times minimizes backstories, but it's one of those things. If one of you're in the woods and one of your players' characters is from the woods or similar woods, then you can just feed them that little detail. Hey, by the way, you notice that these particular pigs are associated with goblins, or you've seen it before when goblins raided your hometown. That was part of your backstory, and your family's cottage got burned down, and that's why you're an adventurer as opposed to a farmer. You're seeing similar things to that, right? So in addition to all the rumors, you can just give it to somebody as kind of like, here's their piece of knowledge. And players, I think, really like having these little things like, ooh, this is something that my character knows, so give them some.
No, I agree. I think that's a great way to do it. And also the idea of, too, that if we're just thinking about OSR stuff, where one of the things that you do have is languages, right? Like if somebody speaks Hobgoblin, you have to assume they know something about Hobgoblins, because why else would they speak that language? It would just seem weird to me. So knowing what languages your players' characters can speak can be a good way to kind of like let them know, like, and I'll use that sometimes. I'll be like, does anybody here speak whatever? And if they do, I'll say, well, blah, blah. This is the way that they do these things. And I think that's just another one of those things you just roll up on your character and you can use.
And
So,
it's
yeah,
a
that's
great
good.
point about languages, because it's not just a language, but we can assume that they know something about the culture. So yeah, asking them, hey, if you speak Goblin, it's not. You can even expand it more, right? Instead of just saying it's languages, you could even call it like languages/culture. Like
Right.
something about goblins, because like you're saying, if you're some kind of dirt farmer, how do you speak Goblin? You must have had some experience with goblins, and if someone's going to teach you Goblin, it means you had to interact with them. It means you probably know something about them. Maybe you were invited, or you did trade or something, and they would trade. Going back to the pigs example, maybe they traded these pigs, or when you were going to trade with them, or some other kind of negotiation, you saw their pig pens outside their lair, whatever it is, right? It's a really great thing to leverage, and I like it a lot too. Now I'm thinking about it, because we're not bolting on any new mechanics at all. We're simply saying that, hey, culture and language are somewhat related. So if you have knowledge of the language, then you have some knowledge of the culture, and you can lean on that.
Yeah, for sure. I think it's just something, right? It's already in the system. We talk about this a bunch, both of us, that like look for a mechanic that already exists and try to use that before you just start adding stuff on is a good technique a lot of times with the OSR games. So we got a couple comments here. Elfbait, I telegraphed a diseased wyvern by having the party encounter half-eaten livestock in small pools with splatters of black bile. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I mean, half-eaten livestock is always a good one, and then having those extra bile, that stuff so you understand, or
Fantasy
maybe a
cattle
smell.
mutilations.
Exactly. Crop circles, right? We want to. Oh, okay, no fun allowed. Give the players a monster power sense, so when they are level 1 and bump into a troll, they can say that power is over. I don't know if I understand that.
I
Okay.
can't see the chat. I'm not in the chat, so you're in the
I
chat.
put it
Let me
on
see.
the. Can you see it if I put it here? I don't know if I can do this. I forgot I have the DM blocking it. There he is. Can you see it there? No, because you're not. All right, I'll just read the
No,
chat.
no.
We'll test my read aloud
This is your
skills.
channel.
This is
I'll
my
read the chat
channel.
on my channel. You
Yeah.
read the chat on your channel.
In other words, during Todd's live stream, it'll be much better. I'm a neglector of the chat. I'm sorry, but at least I admit it. All right. How about flavor text? Come up with a random table for severity of the area, which each option would fit the vague description. Oh, you mean like the more destroyed an area is, the more. I'm not sure I understand that.
Yeah, I want to say that what he was referring to as far as the power level is that kind of thing that you get with MMOs. If you've ever played, I've only played a few MMOs, but that kind of concept where you look in the distance and you'll see a creature and you hover over it, it'll kind of give you, oh, this thing's like green, which means you're good to kill it, or this thing's red, you should leave it alone. I think I mentioned this, I might have been in that same Discord, but I don't like something that specific, but I do like this concept of dread, which is powerful creatures kind of have that emanation, which again, it's one of those tropes, right? When you're looking into the cave, you don't know what's in the cave, but something nasty is there. You just feel it, that it kind of hackles on the back of your neck, something like that. And you could definitely tie that in with player level. When you're first level and there's something of 4 HD in the cave, that make you just feel like really trepidatious, right? And obviously
Right.
I wouldn't take the choice out of the player's hands, but I would say, like, yeah, your knees are trembling a little bit, you're sweating, you feel like part of you saying, like, I don't want to go in that cave, right? And then when they're up to 4th level and that same 4 HD creatures in there, maybe they feel something, but it's not nearly the same, because now they are more powerful in the world. But I definitely like playing on some kind of, I know it's been mechanized in some, like I think auras and things like that, like in 5th edition and things, dragons have auras, but I just like giving that to just any kind of nasty creature. Give them some kind of sense. It's just great for tension, and it is another way you can telegraph it, even if there's no evidence for it. The you get to the door in the dungeon that the ogre's behind, and just before they touch the handle, they just feel, they get a bad vibe about it, and that's something that they can work with. But I think in general, having those, like you were saying, leaning on those 5 senses is a good idea, right? What do they smell? What do they see? What do they hear? Or like in the case, it could be the lack of it. If the birds stop chirping, that probably means something. If you're in a place that seems very busy and suddenly it's super quiet, that probably means something.
Yeah, I think I understand. I guess the hovering thing. I never played an MMO in my life, but maybe I should. I don't know. I don't know that I like that because I like the idea. I mean, it's one simple way to do it. I guess it's a technique, but I don't know. I mean, if you come to this like massive cave in the forest and there's like, drag marks from, deer and stuff that have been, brought in there, bones piled up on the outside, a stink of sweat. If you don't feel like your knees are shaking, you'll roll up a new character. I mean, it's like, that's kind of, I think that I get it though. I do. And sure, sometimes somebody will even say it. Oftentimes I'll use something like that about items. Like they might say, do I get any kind of weird sense from this altar? Like if they're looking at some ancient altar, like they don't know much about it, I might give that. I don't know about giving it for monsters because I like the idea of using size, number one. Generally, if something is much bigger than you, you should be afraid of it, right? But sometimes that's not always true. And I like the idea of surprising the players a little bit, but that's where the telegraphing comes in, right? You don't want to have everything in your campaign that's deadly is huge, and then all of a sudden something the size of a squirrel is like, can wipe out 10th level characters, unless you telegraph it, right?
Sure. But I mean, it can happen, right? Like one little poisonous spider can take down somebody with that just, save versus poison or you die. Kind of thing, right? Which is where it's important to talk about the webs and maybe the cocoons and the, all the other things. I mean, I agree with you that a fully MMO approach is wrong, but I do lay at the idea of just, I don't know, my mind, this idea of you can just kind of feel those sort of auras of menace. You feel some kind of menace coming out of there, and either you want to explore it or you don't. I think with MMOs too, what can happen is, something that they have to deal with that I suppose we have to deal with in our games that's a little bit different is monsters. Like you're kind of like you were saying with size, right? It's one thing to look at it and you say, okay, here's a dragon, and like, yeah, it's huge. It's definitely, super strong on us. But sometimes you can run into kind of variations of creatures or creatures who are small that actually are super deadly. And in that case, how do you, or what tools do you use to telegraph it when you can't just go with, it's ripped all the tree trunks out of the ground and there's scorched earth or something. It's like, no, this is like this is that bunny from Monty Python that's just gonna, bunny with a fang. But even that did have some telegraphing because there were corpses all over the ground and there was like mist in front of the cave and the bunny was sitting
rumors
there. But that's where I think it's really important if you to come up with tools or things that you can differentiate this creature. If you have bunny with a fang in your game and it is wicked deadly, how does that translate into the context of that creature? Because otherwise, how is your party going to have any chance of knowing? Because they can't look at the size. There's not going to be the obvious traces that we might imagine, like giant footprints or, huge claw marks. Okay, well, if you don't have any of that, maybe look at what the monster's about, read its description. I think it's usually a really great thing. Look in the monster manual, wherever you're getting it from, and read the description. Because a lot of times there'll be stuff in there that you can use. Like I threw a basilisk at my players, and there's a thing like, oh, their eyes have a glow around them. So I had one of the players was looking at it from a kind of behind it and down. When its eyes are open a little bit, they sensed they could see the glow. Even though they didn't see the eyes, they just saw the glow. That's something. Like, what are some things you can pull out and talk about when you can't use the obvious ones, like it's just huge and spitting acid or breathing fire or something like that?
Yeah, I think those are the ones that those are the more difficult things, right? I think those are the kind of monsters that, generally speaking, you probably don't want to have them just be random encounters. I would let those things build up a legend, around them as much as possible. But sure, exactly, like the bunny I'm talking about. And Basilisk, I think I when you wrote it, you said like some of these statues look like they were like partially like destroyed, so possibly eaten, right? So that's telegraphing, right? They're statues, but they're not perfect statues. They're like partially destroyed. So that's a little different than a Medusa. So I think it's good to give these things to like, there is this whole idea of surprise, right? Like, oh, you roll the surprise. But sometimes I think one of the reasons why this came up in my mind is because we were having this discussion about somebody, I forget who it was. If you remember who it was, tell me. But they were talking about the idea that you could roll up 300 random orcs on OD&D and that would be, they could surprise you.
Right.
And I said, there's no way in hell that 300 orcs are surprising you. It's just... I mean, okay, there's probably a way, but probably if there's 300 orcs moving all at once, assuming they're moving, right? you're going to hear them. There's going to be scout patrols. There's going to be all this other stuff going on. So that goes back to your, like, give me a minute to figure this out. If you roll 300 orcs, you might need to take a second and say, like, how am I going to work this in? Because obviously they can't be over the next hill unless they've got an encampment. But then why didn't you see any towers set up or people on the hills, like, watching lookouts and stuff? Why didn't you see that? So you gotta telegraph this stuff. Otherwise, it wouldn't be fair to just, like, turn around the corner and be like, oh, 300 orcs. They charge.
Yeah,
right.
I think the problem with a lot of those discussions, I think, is the problem, and you get in the heat of the moment in the thing, and you forget about it. But there's always, I think, what happened in that discussion, and what often happens is you forget that these rules have to be interpreted at the table. So one of the things is, let's just say you roll 300 orcs and you roll there at 120 feet away, right? 300 orcs, 120 feet away, or 120 yards, whatever, if you're out in the wilderness. Okay, are all 300 orcs at 120 yards? Well, they can't possibly be unless you walked into a giant circle of orcs and they're all standing side by side, in a circle. So clearly some of the orcs must be further away than others. You have a column of 300 orcs, and then maybe the first row, so then you have to start thinking about, well, maybe it's the scouts for a band of 300 orcs, and it's the scouts that are at that 120 yard range, and the 300 orcs are some, distance. Besides it, like, the rules don't tell you. They don't say, like, yeah, all the 300 orcs are standing shoulder to shoulder on top of each other, like they're doing a giant, a water ski pyramid, and so they can all be at 120 yards from you. They're kind of figuring that you're going to lay it out there, either theater of the mind or minis, whatever, and you're going to figure out how that works, right? So, like even just a situation before you get into whether you can be surprised or not, you have to think and say, okay, they can't all be there. So yeah, is it a column? What is it about there? And then you start thinking, okay, well, maybe it's just the first couple. Maybe they have a cavalry of some kind, or just light armored scouts, and they're ahead of the main party. Maybe the orc village is over the next hill, and what the surprise thing is for the people who are further, out, right? So it's all about that interpreting it. But just like, depending on how you think of, like, orc villages, right? When you start coming to that village, probably it's probably going to mean a clearing. It's probably going to, if it wasn't a clearing originally, it's probably have been cleared. If they've set up towers, they've cut down trees, they've made marks. Usually if there's a settlement, you're trying to put up things like defenses, or even just warning things. You want people to know, hey, don't come around here. This is ours. So back to the kind of bring it back to telegraphing, is there should be, you generally are not having 300 people just try to hide. And if they are going to hide, if you're saying that, and this kind of goes back to my, what are they, kind of where are they? What are they doing? If the 300 orcs are trying to hide, that their village was burned down, this is the survivors, they're trying to hide somewhere, then that's one thing. Then you're like, okay, they're trying to be stealthy. Then probably whoever's encountered you might not even, if they've surprised you and you haven't surprised them, they might just watch you, because they're trying to hide from something. They're probably not trying to get into a firefight or something that's going to draw the attention of whatever it is they were running from, right? So that taking that context, saying, okay, now so if it is a village, then where is it on the map? What could it be? If I'm in woodlands, then I imagine that maybe that 120 yards away is where you start seeing the forest being cleared. So that kind of becomes that kind of part of your, encounter, I don't know, zone or whatever you want to call it. It's kind of what traces you're seeing of them. Because the other thing is, it could be, you can read the surprise as in who's noticed whom. It doesn't have to be eyeballs on the village. It could be that 120 yards away is where you're seeing those traces. You're seeing where trees have been felled. You're seeing where maybe totems have been put up or other kind of warning signs. You've seen where maybe they had fire pits, or maybe they're just their garbage pits are, so that you're seeing, okay, this village is here. We have surprise. In other words, we've seen them and we're aware of this area, this thing that's going on in this village, and the village is not yet aware of us. And then what do? If it's them surprising us, then we can say that, well, maybe we are in there, we passed through their defense perimeter not knowing, and some of their scouts, guards, whatever, have seen us, but the village itself is further back, because that's what it would be. No point in having kind of your scouts running perimeters if it's right at the village. Like, that's not saving you any time. You're only going to spot them when they actually hit the edge of your village, then you fail. So there's some part out there. And so from that 120 yards, then you can determine, well, how much further away would those guards be from the village? Probably within, I don't know, horn call, right? You wouldn't want to make it so far that if you had to call for trouble, people couldn't get to you. So it wouldn't be miles and miles and miles away, but it's not going to be right on top of it either, right? So then you can decide, okay, how far away was this sort of thing. But it's really all about building that context. But I think so often in discussions you get caught up in what the rules say literally in the books, forgetting that the whole idea is that you as the GM are supposed to take these rules and interpret it for the game and not just toss it out there like, yep, 300 orcs in a giant ball 120 yards away, roll initiative, go. Right. It wasn't meant to do that way, but sometimes the discussions end up making you think that like that's what people think it was supposed to be. Yeah,
it's I was remembering. So first of all, when you said they were all smushed together, it made me think, oh, maybe some like pissed off wizard shrunk them down and they're only like the size of like an inch tall, and that's why they're all in one spot. So I think a low-level party could take out 300 orcs that are only 1 inch tall. Maybe not.
Absolutely.
But it made me think of, I was running this hex crawl once. It was from a book, and I didn't read, they were going everywhere, and I hadn't read the whole book. And then I looked at this square, and there was supposed to be a castle there. And I'm like, well, they're on an open beach. Like, they would have seen this castle miles away. So I was like, well, there can't be a castle. Like, how is that going to work? So I ended up making the castle really tiny. And then I did this whole kind of Gulliver's Travel thing. And it actually ended up creating a whole other quest because it was like a Gulliver Travel thing where they got shrunk. But it was because I didn't, I was like, I got to just make this up. So yeah, you got to look at what you got in front of you and make it make sense to you for your world. I think that's super important. But I think we definitely have the idea of the water skiing orc pyramid as an encounter that's going. Yeah, we're going to definitely do that.
I mean, there was that bit in Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, I think it was, in one of the books where the two extraterrestrials are having some kind of last ditch meeting before they're all at war with each other, and then they I think Arthur's voice went gone through time and space and interrupted them, and it was some dire insult, and the two forces end up joining together and flying towards Earth, having triangulated the signal, and then because they'd messed up something, they were swallowed by a dog because they were just so tiny. They had no idea. They just flew to Earth. They flew all the way to Earth. Were swallowed by it, and I think they make a point of saying it was a small dog, and it was swallowed by a small dog.
Yeah, oh man! Yeah. Oh, we got a lot of chat going on here. Okay, see, I'll ignore you guys. All right, so let's see. Okay, monsters we done. How about flavor? Okay. Oh, so this is interesting. Coming from 3 to 5e, it's so easy for the DM to have a load of meaningless dungeon dressing like scattered bones and whatnot, where such things could be super useful. Yeah, I agree with that. I think that I mentioned this actually in a video once where I talked about how you should describe things. And I think that the idea of just describing everything in the dungeon in minute detail is bad. I think you want to focus on things so that the players can see when something's different. So yeah, the dungeon might have bones everywhere, but you don't need to describe that in every room. You want to describe it when you're getting close to a monster where they would be relevant. At least that's how I feel about that.
Yeah, I usually would give some kind of general dungeon dressing. Like, here's this area. Yeah. This was kind of what makes this area unique or interesting. And then, yeah, you want to make sure you're focusing in on the details that are going to be more important, right? Because if you just fill every room with endless detail, then it's going to be impossible to figure out which details are important. So part of that license you have as a GM or, as a writer or as a painter or anything, whenever you're trying to paint a picture mentally of the place, is you are going to determine which things are important, and you can kind of abstract or push the other stuff in the background. Like, is it dusty? Yes, but you can just say wow, there's dust everywhere in all these rooms. If I go on and on about the dust in every room, either the party's going to think okay, there must be something really interesting with this dust because he keeps talking about it all the time, or I'm just kind of wasting my breath about it, right? When I really want them to focus on the couple of interesting, or at least the things that catch their, attention. But yeah, that's part of that license you have to interpret things, is you want to pick out the important stuff.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. So, Esoteric Monster Manual, I think I have that, but I don't know if it talks about telegraphing. I don't doubt it. I think we're not making this up. It's not a new thing. It's just something I don't think gets talked about. Balancing with surprise, the party gets telegraphed, but then flub when they're setting up. But that could be, or they get the wrong. You could also, if you want to play it narratively, they could get the wrong set of information. They might see footprints going in one direction, but not realize that those are older. So they're prepping over here, and then they end up getting surprised from the rear. I mean, that could happen, sure. I usually don't roll surprise.
In certain instances. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
No, I think this is one thing that gets. I don't know. I don't want to say. I don't want to say people are playing wrong, but I think people assume you always need to roll surprise because it does say in the step-by-step procedural roll surprise. But roll surprise if it seems necessary or relevant. You don't always have to roll surprise. It really comes down to what's going on.
Yeah, there are definitely going to be circumstances where nobody's surprising anybody, right? The alarm's been raised. The party's tromping about. They're fighting everything that comes. their position is not in doubt, they're making plenty of noise, the goblins coming around the corner are not going to be surprised. They're looking for the party is there. And the party is probably looking for the goblins, unless the goblins are coming from a different angle, which could be one thing, right? The party might be looking ahead of them, but these goblins are coming from some passage that's behind them, something like that, right? So yeah, but you definitely have secret door, whatever, keep in mind that I was going to say, I think I might have lost my train of thought there. Something we were talking about surprise. If it comes to me, yeah,
sorry.
If it comes back to me, I'll mention. No, it's fine. I'll think about it, but I'm sure it wasn't that interesting anyway.
If there's rumors in town, one will always be missing livestock. That is the truth. Missing livestock is the classic.
Rats in the basement, missing livestock. Absolutely.
Exactly. Excellent example of telegraphing is in the video game Dark Souls. I've heard of that. I've not played it.
I've only played a little bit. I wasn't very good at it.
Or you were very good. My understanding is you just get killed a lot. Yeah, so I think that's part of it.
Yeah, I was excellent at getting killed.
All right. Smell and sounds telegraph that something is bad before it's seen. And not seeing it right away heightens attention like Alien. Yeah, I agree. What I think is interesting too about, we often do things like rotting or body odor or dank for when we want to telegraph like stuff. But the other thing you can do is if it's just different than what's already there, that's a good way to telegraph something. So if you are traveling through a dungeon that's been described as like dusty or wet or dank or whatever, and then all of a sudden you smell flowers, right? This is going to tell the party something's going on, because it doesn't always have to be a monster. It could be a positive thing, or it could be a good smelling monster,
Hey, yeah, I think I definitely like, I think it would definitely throw me off if I was in a dank dungeon and suddenly the smell of blueberries comes through the air.
Right.
I would definitely like, whoa, what's happening? What's happening there? I mean, yeah, you could have a lot of fun, and that's also where you can kind of build up that world building. Maybe there are certain monsters that, for whatever reason, they have a very, very lovely smell,
right.
but they could be really nasty, but maybe their glands secrete some kind of wonderful aroma for mating or otherwise. You can kind of build that in. And maybe the party won't know. They'll know something's off. And then when they see it, and the next time they smell blueberries, they're going to be like, okay, we got to either hightail it out of here or get our shields up, or, and that'll make it even funnier when they get to someone's like blueberry garden and and the party's all like ready to, fire on sight. Just some poor guy trying to pick some berries.
I'm just thinking of like a very good smelling troglodyte. That's like the outcast of the troglodyte society because they smell really
clean.
Right. Oh, man. All right, so, Dark Souls. Playing more realistic style, you should also have more intelligent monsters hesitate to attack. Sure, unless they have the advantage.
I mean, they should have a goal, right? I think the big thing is they should have a goal. And if they don't have a goal, then maybe they shouldn't attack, right?
Yeah.
Or,
I think that's pretty. Yeah, I think that makes sense, and that's one reason why you roll the reaction roll if you don't know, right? Again, you don't have to roll a reaction roll; you roll it if you don't know. If you know that this ogre here, this is a mother ogre, and she's got 3 children, and this is her cave, and you're coming in, and she's dealt with humans before, she's probably not going to hesitate to kill you because, assuming she can, because she's afraid you're going to try to take her ogre babies. So
yeah. I think you can. I think that's where I like to read. I still like to roll reactions in that case, but I like to use them for different things. So maybe on the positive reaction roll, the ogre goes defensive, right? Thinks like, maybe I can hide. Maybe I'll take the kids and flee and come back. Whereas on the negative side, they're maybe even because they're pessimistic, they decide like, what, I'm fighting to the death. There's nowhere for me to go.
Right.
Or, you could come up with all different ways to use it. Or maybe she'll surrender and say, listen, I'll help you out. I'm not going to stand in your way. I'm just here with my kids. I don't want any trouble, basically. Right. So I think you can leverage them. I think, again, something that happens is people read in the book, positive says this, negative says that. Therefore, it's, only use it on that particular spectrum. Whereas I like saying you can make it however you want to think of what's the very positive versus negative. You might think of it from say in this ogre case, the very positive maybe is that the party really intimidated the heck out of this ogre. This ogre sees the party and it's like, I don't want any. Whereas on the very negative end, maybe they feel like I can take them, like you were saying, or I don't feel like I have a choice, or whatever. So you can pick the 2 poles that you want to have,
right? And
then what's in between, and then use it for that. Because I always like the variance of kind of like, well, how would they think about it? If I have a clear cut idea, I'll just go with it. But if I don't, then I'll roll.
No, I agree.
See what happens.
I agree. That works really well. And also, if you do roll something, let's say you have like a single creature that definitely couldn't take a party of 4, and they know that, and you roll attack, they might try to run through with the weapon to clear a field and run like that. You don't even need to roll morale. You can just look at it and be realistic and say this is what's going to happen, even though I roll.
Maybe they'll go get help. Like, who are the other nearest things they can go and, if it's like a Caves of Chaos situation, maybe they'll try to run over to the next cave and do something that way. There's a lot of ways you can play up the kind of aggressiveness or unfriendliness or kind of what that means. It's that context. It's really about building up that context in different ways.
No, I agree. I like that. 300 sneaky orcs. I just picture the orcs on their tiptoes, like kind of. Okay, once played a Halloween one-shot where GM used old school creepy organ music to warn of danger ahead. Oh, that's fun.
Oh, that's great.
Oh, man. That's pretty cool. Yeah, I like that.
It is very cool. I wish I had some good sound effects queued up. I would definitely use them.
It's like, dude. Actually, I just ran, I didn't put it public because it was for a playtest, but I just ran an adventure where it's like there's like a series of things that happen, and whenever this like creature's coming, this music you're supposed to play. I couldn't play it because I might put it on YouTube and write some music, but you're supposed to play a very specific song. So they were using that actually, and it worked. Of course, I sang it, so that's why you'll probably never see this. You do not want to see me doing it, but I think that kind of stuff works really well because it's tropey, but it works, especially in a horror game. It's like, oh, you hear like dun 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 dun, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think it's really helpful to lean into the tropes because everybody knows them. We're trying to kind of translate things from this fiction that we're all imagining together into things that as people we understand. And part of what makes those things tropes is we inherently understand them. So use them to your advantage. And if you got the means and the method to do kind of audio cues, that's great. I wish I had a 4D setup where I could just spray different scents at people and shake their seats and things when something's happening. I would use it.
You play in person, you run up to him, you're shaking him.
Shake him.
You're scared.
Like, this is what you smell.
You could hand out scratch and sniff stickers.
Absolutely.
All right. Tomb of the Serpent King. There's a basilisk. Oh, right. It's blind, right? That's pretty cool. Spoiler for that module. Yeah, it's pretty cool. Actually, I use that similar thing because if you read, and maybe I was misinterpreting it, but in 5th edition, it says something very specific in the basilisk description about that you have to make eye contact with it in order to turn invisible or to turn to stone. Something to that effect. So in other words, if the basilisk can see you and you can't see it, you won't turn to stone, and vice versa. So I actually had a basilisk through a one-way mirror wall. So like the basilisk was on the other side, and it couldn't see the player characters. So, but they were like trying to hide from it because they didn't know the basilisk couldn't see them. So it was like they had to make their way down this corridor. It was pretty awesome. It was super fun to watch them, like really so nervous. They're like, all right, I'm going to roll to keep my, and they're like trying to get past, and these other things are attacking them. But basilisks are super fun. Yeah. Party of Gullivers. Okay. Large number of the creatures would generate a amount of waste, exactly. Dungeon dressing should be meaningful. I agree.
Yep.
Let's see. A toilet hole at least to the level of dungeon. Hey, if you really want that treasure. Sometimes when you describe something repetitively, you could telegraph it by absence. Yep, that's a good idea. Yeah, if you're constantly saying there's dripping water and then it stops, right?
Yeah. Oh, I had a midden hole in a dungeon. Actually, the party was coming up the other side, so they were underneath, and zombies were falling down the midden hole into this pit and then trying to climb out. And
nice.
So that made for a fun, definitely made for a fun encounter.
Yes, it's not all glamorous to be an adventurer.
No. I mean, they wanted to find like this back door, and I thought, well, yeah, there's probably something down there. What could be there? Well, maybe they have this midden pit that they've drilled in.
Right. Yeah, exactly. The dust is the example. And like, again, you'll say that, like in the adventure I'm right now in Astonishing Swordsmen and Sorcerers, almost all these rooms in this particular dungeon have these like crystal shards. So every 3 or 4 rooms, I'll be like, just like the rest of the rooms, all crystal shards. And then every once in a while, they'll run into one where there's none. And I'll say specifically, this room does not have the crystal shards that you're used to seeing. And they'll be like, okay, something's going on. And they're trying to put together why these rooms are connected, which is pretty interesting. Or they're ignoring me. I mean, who knows? No, they're definitely.
Yeah. I mean, that's the one thing, right? You just have to make sure that you're on the ball, because what can happen, I think it's happened to everybody, where you're in the middle, you're in the middle of doing your thing and you realize that you forgot the detail. Like you've been going through and they're in the room and you're like, oh, wait a minute. I should have told you guys 20 minutes ago, but either the room you're in or maybe it was the last room didn't have shards in it. Like you forgot. I know that's happened to me. I'm sure it's happened to other people too. So, and I'm never afraid to go like, oh, by the way, I forgot this. Could be important detail. So if you want to go back to the room, we can do that. Right. It's whatever notes you can keep that can help you remember these details as you're filling them in, because it's great to come up with all of them, but it's no good if you forget to tell your party. So, make sure the players get informed.
This is interesting. Telegraphing can be useful by bypassing I don't know if I agree with that word, but low-level thief skills as hints regarding traps, picking, leaving skill rolls to the unnoticed or extraordinary. Yeah, I think, again, it depends on your play style. I find that I tend to not have the thieves roll a lot if they can figure it out. If they tell me what they're doing and it works. So, yeah. I don't know. Do you telegraph traps? I think that's really actually a very good idea.
I try to be very expansive with what I get. I don't have a thief in my current campaign, but I try to be expansive with them because they're, the verbiage seems to indicate that they are very skilled at things. Number one, at the few things they can do. And it's not like they have a whole lot of other things to do. Like this is really their jam. And if you're not going to give it to them and they've got like a 30% chance of finding just like a pressure plate, I'd rather they have a 30% chance of finding something really unique. And then just, if they're not paying attention at all, sure. But if they're paying attention, I want to let them know, hey, you can see the outlines of the pressure plate. You may not know what it's triggering or exactly the rest of the mechanism, but you can see that much. And then the players are usually, without even rolling on the skills, can say, okay, can I put a little wedge under the pressure plate to keep it from dropping? Or can we just walk around it or whatever, But with the thieves, I don't feel like there's a need to be super narrow with the definition. Like, let them have it, because sometimes people will get kind of caught up in. And I was probably gonna make a video on this, but some of these things that we say, well, we don't want thieves to get like too out of hand with something crazy. But it's like, well, how often those crazy things really come up? Like, are they going to be climbing hundreds of feet of sheer glass in your campaign anytime soon? Probably not. So then I'm not going to worry about what happens if they get to that point. Like, just, give it to them, because you still have the rest of the party still has to fumble around, even if the thief is able to do whatever thief things. They don't get a lot of big breaks. Backstab is super hard to do, and it's not even all that effective if you do it. So you know what? I'm going to just be like, hey, you're not casting any spells. You're not kiting yourself out in all the toughest arms and armor. So you know what? I'll give you that pressure plate. I'm okay. It's not going to ruin my dungeon experience to say, hey, thief, your eagle eyes spot, the little bit of discoloration or however you want to define that happening. Give it to him. Be generous, Mr. Spade.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Like if you have your 10-foot pole out and you're tapping and prodding on the ground, you're almost certainly going to find the trap. I mean, I don't worry too much about rolling for that. Unless, again, as long as they're doing it. If the player wants to just say, hey, I'm just going to search for traps in this room, and they don't just make any description, then I'll say, oh, I guess we have to roll for it. But generally, I'll be like, what are you doing? Are you checking what kind of trap are you looking for? And, if they're looking for something, it's like if the key is under the mattress and they look under the mattress, they find the key. I mean, it's not that hard.
Yeah. I usually will prompt them. I usually don't let them get away with saying, well, I searched the room. I'm like, well, what are you searching? Or I'll say to them, if they want to search the whole room top to bottom, okay, that's going to take 3 hours. Do you want to spend 3 hours doing the entire room? And the answer is usually no, we don't have 3 hours. So let's be more specific than that.
Yeah. The only time I go for a general search is like if the room is just a mess. Like they go into a room and there's like 30 dead bodies stacked in a pile. I search the bodies is probably fine for me. I'm not going to make them explain.
And that is part of the telegraphing, because it's not just telegraphing danger, but it's also telegraphing things like treasure, like hidden. And I think Tomb of the Serpent King does a good job with this, where they have certain elements of the dungeon that once you learn them will like it establishes connections, right? I think every time there's a statue like this, there tends to be a secret thing or whatever. So, those patterns are important. Unlike in movies, usually if there's one section of a wall that's always swinging in and out, there's going to be traces on the floor. There's going to be, things of that nature to show their hinges, whatever it is. Telegraph that stuff so that it gives your party those kind of tools to find it. I'm fine if some things are just completely hidden, and that's great, but just understand that most parties are probably going to miss it, which is fine. But a lot of other stuff, make it, show them the right details, or at least, put it in the mix There's another reason why you don't want to bury everything in meaningless details, because how are they going to point out the ones that might be interesting if there's always just a laundry list of meaningless stuff? And I've seen that happen where the GMs are like, I put this thing in here and the party didn't find it. And then they would, well, what was going on? And there's just so much stuff. It's like a cacophony of things in the room. Well, of course, at some point they're going, well, and usually it's not because they're not invested in the game. It's because they're invested. If we're thinking like, we got to move, we got 10 minutes to spend finding something. So we got to pick something out of this whole just explosion of things. They're probably going to miss the one thing. And if those other things aren't really important and they don't make a lot of difference, then just, you don't have to be that they're not there, but just minimize them. Don't make everything seem of the same import. Give them places to focus.
Excuse me. I agree 100%. So we've got Andrew. He's got fire beetles. He's going to telegraph by chewed stuff. Oh, that's interesting. But hold on, and then eggs, then larvae, and then the beetles, of course. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, I actually use them for one of the sword timber swords. I'm actually behind on the sword timber swords I'm working on with Terrence from Homebrew Detritus. But it's really not the fire beetles; they just kind of glow, or it's like there's just their glands glow. They don't like spit fire or anything. Which is, when I back and read them, I was like, wow, the fire beetles, not all that firing. But yeah, you could think about what might. Maybe the eggs glow. Maybe the eggs are translucent. They might see these glowing things that are eggs, or maybe their stool has some of the phosphorescent material, whatever. So the,
I like that
little kind of flaming poop balls that are kind of around because they've got that stuff in them.
Yeah, I like fire beetles because I like the idea of the again, almost thinking back to the idea of Tomb of the Serpent King, which is supposed to be like a teaching module. I think fire beetles are great for low-level parties because it shows them that monsters can be interesting in the way that you can pull those glands out, right? Like use them like torches. And of course, because they glow for whatever many turns or days or whatever, they don't need to use your oil, so you can save resources and torches. But also, if you had to, let's say, go in water, you can use them for that. So now you reach an adventure where you want to explore an underwater cave. We fought fire beetles before. We can seek these out to use them as a source for light.
Oh, interesting. And and if you're hungry, you can just eat them after they finish glowing.
That's right.
Fry them up.
We eat the rest of it. That's the part you don't eat.
They're a little bit spicy, a little bit hot.
A little bit spicy. Yeah, I like the various beetles. I'm a big insect monster person, so I feel like that those often leave traces. Like we say, like the spiders are great because you get the webs, and you can do things like they walk down the corridor and like a whole bunch of like fist-sized spiders that aren't going to actually do any damage, just like go scurrying out of the room when you shake the web, and that wakes up the mama, which is huge or whatever. Yeah, love that.
No, I've had some spiders are a lot of fun. I mean, yeah, I do agree with you. I like a lot of the insects and the giant ones, and plus there's something I think primal. They really affect us as people, the kind of fear of spiders, fear of these big insects kind of helps raise the tension level. And sometimes other things don't so much.
Right. And I think they're a good mix between them and, let's say, like your humanoids, where there's going to be a chance, right? The ogre might negotiate, might talk to you, might help you, orcs, goblins, whatever. But the fire beetles just want to eat you, or they're going to run. Like, there's no, you don't want to only have that in your game, but it's nice to have that, right? Where they're just kind of like something you can fight and not really worry too much about. So I kind of like insects for that reason. Boy, that was a total side. Trap should be solved like a puzzle. Yeah, I don't disagree with that. I'm actually, the more I run games, this is my current mood deal. So 2 years from now, somebody will watch this video and be like, that's not how Daniel runs games. But I start to lean away from traps. I used to be I like weird, funky things, but I'm not a big just you walk down the hallway, you fall in a pit trap person. In fact, usually if I have a pit trap in my game, it'll already be open as a way to telegraph that the dungeon's dangerous. I just don't use them that much anymore. I don't know why. I just I'm out of that Chipotle flavored.
I use them. I use them with care.
Right.
I use them with care, but I'm not a big puzzle person in the dungeon either, because I feel like the dungeon itself is the puzzle. Like the game is the puzzle, so I don't feel the need to drop a Sudoku in the middle of the dungeon as some kind of additional puzzle. It's to me, it just kind of, when I see this stuff like that, it just kind of throws me out of the game. Number one, number two, I don't know. I just kind of feel like I don't need to. This is not to me. That's not what the game is about. The game is about all these other things that we've mentioned in all of our videos, and the management of resources and doing all the stuff and figuring out how to do things the most efficient way possible and avoiding the combats you can avoid and trying to get all that stuff creates a really intricate, beautiful puzzle. I don't need the added, well, now do this crossword, so that you can go to the next room.
The kind of puzzles that I like are ones that are solvable from within the dungeon. Like, for instance, I may have talked about before in the video where in one of my campaigns, I had an area where they found these scrolls that all had riddles on them, but the answers to the riddles were in another room. Like when you went to the other room, there were actually paintings of each of the answers. So they went into a room and they saw all these really intricate paintings and they're like, what does this mean? What's going on here? And then they found these like scrolls with these riddles. And then they were like, well, hold on, this riddle means moon. Like, I mean, did some really obvious ones, right? Did some from The Hobbit, so everybody knows those ones. And then like, hold on, they went back to the room. And then they're like, aha, this is somehow connected. And by using them together, they were able to like solve a puzzle. But it's like very obvious. Like they didn't need to actually know the riddles. They needed to know like one of them, just in order to get that going. That's the kind of riddle I use. I wouldn't do a Sudoku, although that sounds kind of funny. You get into a room, it's a whole bunch of adventurers all sitting in chairs with their pencils, and they're all doing it. You can't move on to the next part until you...
That would be good. That would be great to have the dungeon that's got some hard puzzles. So all these other adventure groups are all sitting in various, trying to figure out,
You got the answer to number 5? Yeah, I think it's B.
Yeah. Like arguing, like, we have to slide this statue over here. No, it's over this one. No, didn't you look at the chart? They've got got their chalk on the ground. They're scrolling on all these different. It would be great to have something like that. The kind of like the Men in Black thing, where the trick, like they're trying to do the test and they're doing terrible jobs. They're trying to do it on their laps, and only Will Smith decides to use the table.
Right.
And like all these adventures are just missing the one obvious thing, which is like just knock the door. Just knock in the door. They're all like moving around statues and doing this or that, and it would be a great kind of weird encounter where they're not even anti the rest of the party. Like, no, you guys got to help us figure it out. And the real puzzle is just go bang the damn door down with a big mallet or something. Forget all this moving statues around.
That is really funny, actually. See that in an adventure near you with the water skiing orcs.
That's right.
Clearly, we run a serious game here. I like weird shit like that, though. I think that kind of stuff can be really fun to throw in once in a while. But generally speaking, yeah, I like traps to be something the party can find and overcome. Like I guess what I'm saying is I don't necessarily want my players to fall into a pit trap and die, right? So it's like you want to have them, but you want to make sure that this is where the telegraphing comes in, right? So like you have one early on in a dungeon where it's already open and there's a dead body in it. Now you're telegraphing this dungeon may have pit traps, and they can actually use that knowledge to figure out the rest. That's kind of what I mean by that. Not putting down anybody who likes to use pit traps.
To me, the fun thing about the traps isn't so much that, I mean, there's that kind of when you see them coming in, but I always love that part, or for me anyway, where I feel like I'm being devious, is I want to know, is the party going to remember them on their way out? Because I'm someone who role plays leaving the dungeon. And that's the best part, when they may have gotten around it the first time, but did they mark it down? Did they record where it is? And if they're on the run and they're in a hurry, then suddenly that trap that it may have been open, whatever, now suddenly that's up for grabs again. And they're going to have nobody to blame but themselves because they knew it was there, but this time they weren't paying attention, and that's where I kind of think like, oh, this is going to be fun.
Well, right. This is where like the mapping comes in, right? Where you got to have a map. If you have a map, you'll remember there's a trap there. But also what's interesting too, with this is an OD&D, it's also in BX, is that typically traps are only sprung if you roll a 1 or a 2 on a D6 when somebody crosses the trigger, right? So you could have the whole party walk across a pit trap and have it not open. And then later on when they're walking through the dungeon on the way back, they got all this treasure laden down. They're like, we're out of here. We're going to go have a party. And whoa, they fall in the trap. That could be really fun too, I guess, yeah. Well, I'm pretty devious.
I like that. I mean, because people ask, it's that question of that the answer is right there in the books, but people forget about is that people say, well, if this trap's been here for 1,000 years, how come it hasn't gone up before? Well, that's because it's kind of half frozen, and it's why only a 1 and 2 in 6, and some of the other guys that came through didn't roll a 1 or 2 on a 6, so they walked over and it didn't quite spring, and you were unlucky, and that's where you knocked the rust off or whatever, and it finally opened. So
right,
but yeah, it's great, but it definitely adds a deviousness to all those traps, because you might think, oh yeah, it's clear, but nope, it's not.
Can I ask about dungeon levels? Lower levels are more dangerous. Should you telegraph when the party gets lower level? Make it explicit. Down the lower level, watch out. So, well, lower level, it all depends on how you count it. If you mean lower numbers, then, right. So typically they count right down. You could do a tower too, where the ones going up are more dangerous, right? But yes, the deeper, let's say deeper, that makes more sense. Deeper is more dangerous. I think it's a good idea to telegraph, but not always. That's where your sloping passages and tricks can come in. It depends on the kind of dungeon you're running, but yeah, if somebody's playing a traditional dungeon crawl and they see a set of stairs going down, they should know, and the players should know that going into this, that typically it's going to be more dangerous going deeper. I mean, that's how I like to play.
I let them know at the beginning because I have new players, and when I started OSR, part of my session 0 was kind of here's how these things work.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, but it was also meant to be kind of tricksy because you'll see, or at least the guy at half level. But generally, I let them know that hey, the further kind of away from the surface you're getting, whether up or down, the more deadly things are going to be. So know that, right? And
yeah, and that's how you do it. That's kind of a meta or session 0 type talk, right? You talk about how you're going to run this, and right, the further you are from the entrance, that's a good way to say it. I think too that, but yeah, you can sometimes trick people, right? Like using sloping passages, and some people say, "Oh, I don't even understand what that's supposed to mean." Well, if you have a dwarf in the party, they're going to possibly know if you're going to a lower level, where the rest of the party might not notice. This is an advantage of a dwarf or a bag of marbles. Whenever we're in like a long corridor, it's always like, I'm going to put some marbles down on the ground. Because the sloping passage, in order to not notice it, it's going to be pretty subtle, right? So whenever you get that like 100-foot long corridor or longer, it's like, what's going on here? Or pour water, I guess. Trick. There you go, right? I used to play the thief all the time. That's my favorite class. So and that's how I bypass having to roll things.
But did you use them like caltrops? So that like if monsters are coming, they would take those big comic slips on the marbles and fall on their butts.
Exactly. Yeah. You gotta have the marbles. But yeah, that's right. So lower levels are more dangerous. If they run. Oh, if they're on the run, where the thief's detection skill roll would be handy. I wouldn't let a thief roll to search for something or detect something if they were running. Running, you're running.
Yeah, running. It's you're going just on pure adrenaline and whatnot. So there's no checking. I take it that the standard speed is kind of like you're moving fairly carefully, because a lot of people will say, well, why is it so slow? Why does it take you 10 minutes to walk 120 feet? It's because you really are. Your default mode of walking the dungeon is slow because you're trying to be as stealthy as you can and be as careful as you can, blah, 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 blah. In that case, I would let the thief kind of roll. But if you're just running, then you've decided that I don't know what's going on and I don't care. I just need to get out. So that's all you're concentrating on. Everything else is up for grabs.
That's a good point. Traps waste a precious resource, time. That is true. Time is one of those things that people forget is the major resource in the dungeon. You only have so many torches and so many hit points, I guess, and spells. And the longer you're in the dungeon, the more you're going to use it.
And the more those wandering monsters will come out.
Exactly.
Potentially.
Yeah, those wandering monsters, man, they're wandering. We're not sure where they came from. That's a whole other.
Yes, and I think, and just to follow up on that, that's one thing. If you're in your dungeon or you're prepping your dungeon and you're trying to figure out your things, and we want to do telegraphing, you want to do all this stuff. This is why you want to make your own wandering encounter tables. That way, you're building it in. If you're making a goblin lair. Then don't put things in your wandering encounter table that is not going to have context in your descriptions of the goblin lair, because if those things exist, then they should leave traces like everything else. So just don't put them in. If you're going to go in a funhouse dungeon, then you have to be a little bit more loosey-goosey with that, because part of that expectation is you could run into giant centipedes down one hallway, and then the next minute run into a gelatinous cube, and the next minute maybe you run into an ogre. But in that way, you have to know that, and you have to kind of maybe a good thing to do is look at your dungeon description, then look at your wandering monster encounters, and add things from all of those, because presumably if they're wandering around, it means that at some point within the last couple of days they've all been through that area. So look at it and say, okay, your goblins, your giant, cockroaches, your whatever, they've all been moving through that area. So what do they all leave behind? And work that into your descriptions, and that way, no matter what rolls up, some of that context will already, be there for you. Or at least some elements of them will be there.
Yeah, and the other thing you can do too is, one thing I like to use in wandering monsters are things that might hunt the things that are in the dungeon. So let's say that you are a goblin dungeon, right? you might actually put, I think it's gnomes that hate goblins. I can't remember now. You might put a party of gnomes in there because the gnomes are actually out to kill the goblins because gnomes hate goblins. If you're going by those traditional, like if you're playing BX, for instance. So you might actually have, right, because you might be like, well, why are there gnomes in here? Gnomes and goblins don't go together. Well, they're more likely to be on the side of the PCs if the PCs are, trying to steal from or defeat the goblins because that's what the gnomes are there for. But they might also be like, no, this gold is ours, and that you could have that conflict there, right? So I like that kind of stuff. And usually near entrances, I put animals. Animals that might get in. Like if it's a big cave entry, I might put like possibility of wolves or something, especially when you first get there, empty castle ruin, you're like exploring the surface level. That could be animals. So yeah, but otherwise, I think you're absolutely right. Whatever kind of monster dwells there would be the best to have. Yeah.
I also like doing things like putting like giant centipedes with trash or waste or things like that. Like, why are they hanging around there? It's because there's a big pile of, goblin stuff.
Yeah. And the goblins generally know they're there, so they avoid them. They go in there knowing, okay,
or
the
they feed them.
Here, so,
they've got that kind of symbiotic relationship. They keep feeding them their poop, and the things stay happy.
Yeah, 100%. Wandering dungeons, key to a dungeon. My favorite from the last dungeon was an unseen voice speaking a rhyme as a wandering monster. That's also fun too. Is you can do gnomes, kobolds, dwarves, or goblins. Thank you. You can also do wandering things as either, this is an apparition, but something might be, you might just hear sounds, right? You might roll on your table and say, hey, you might have scat or a sign that they're there, or, remember, they don't always have to be right there on top of you. You can do it that way and just choose not to roll surprise if you roll that encounter,
Absolutely. You can also use distance for that too. If you roll the farthest distances, especially if you're looking at it and going, 180 feet away, and the dungeon is like around 5 corners and behind 3 shut doors, probably not going to see them. But then what have you actually found at that distance? Maybe it is scat if it's an animal, or some other kind of trace, something else, a dropped torch that's still kind of warm, or, whatever it is, a half-eaten sandwich,
Right. Yes.
a half-eaten fire beetle gland, that somebody tossed away.
Then when you encounter the goblin later, their face is all glowing.
They're just looking for milk. Too hot. Need milk.
It's very spicy beetles.
It's the dungeon hot sauce challenge, starring fire beetle glands.
Oh God, that is funny. All right, so that's pretty good. I think. Anything else? I think that we could be going an hour. That seems like a good run. What time? Anything else in the chat?
That's a good run. I'm definitely happy to answer anything else from the chat. Otherwise, we can wrap it.
Yeah, looks like let me see if I got everything. Oh, somebody's poking starting to cause trouble. That's why the light cantrip is the best thing to happen to D&D.
Boo, his
light cantrip. The light spell is actually very powerful in older games. So the cantrip, whatever. It just lets you see in the dark, which is useful. I'd like to have that.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I kind of do, right? We all carry it in our pocket, right? We got a flashlight right there. That's our cantrips.
Yeah.
Yeah. No. Thanks. My cat was wandering monster. You would encounter a cat. You would just find mice ripped to pieces. Oh, wow. Man, my cat, I used to have they actually saw a mouse and just stared at it for about 20 minutes until I had to go scoop the mouse up and get him out of the house.
Oh yeah, my cat did that too. My cats were not mousers at all. We were in a country. We took them to the country with us, and this mouse came out. The mouse looked at the cats. The cats looked at the mouse. The mouse turned around and walked back where it came from. The cats just kind of looked at each other. And I thought, I guess these just must be city cats. They just never seen a mouse before in their life. Didn't know.
Exactly.
These.
I'm not dealing with that. All right.
And one of my cats is right here. Sorry, Bruce. And, but it's true. You're not a mouser.
That's okay. Not everybody can be a mouser. All right, guys. Thank you for watching. I'm not sure when. Did we decide what day? But at some point this week or early next week, we're going to be on Hexed Press on Todd's channel, which I'm sure you follow if you're here. And we will go from there. So, CC. Oh, as in Spanish. You're speaking Spanish.
As in yes. We don't have a topic yet. We have to come up with a topic. No, right. Nothing.
We need a topic. If you have a topic, again, let us know. And we'll go from there. All right.
Absolutely.
Farewell. I don't know how to do this. So
Game on, everybody.